I'm pleased to be here with Stelios Papadopoulos, the Chairman of Biogen, a good patrioti, and Yasu Kalimera Stelio. This is a oral history interview for the National Hellenic Museum to chronicle the Greek-American story. And we're going to start with Stelios and start with your family background, Stelio. Tell me about Papoudis. I know you were born in my hometown, Thessaloniki. Right. Where were you born? Tell me a little bit about your roots.
Surely. I was born in 1948 in Sinikismo Harilau, which is, at the time, it was the outermost neighborhood in Thessaloniki. You know, a few houses past our house was open fields with flowers, wheat, trees. The grandparents, I didn't meet all of them. On my father's side, I met my grandfather. He was born in Asia Minor. We are Pontian Greeks, from that line of inheritance. And my grandmother, I never met. She had died much younger. In fact, my father was also born in Asia Minor and came to Greece in 1923-24 with the exchange of population, but he was barely a few months old. So they registered him as if he was a newborn in Nausa, where the family had originally settled. And that was not an uncommon thing that, some of the people coming from Asia Minor would be registered even a year or two old as being born in Greece. Others who had been, in fact, a few years old could not come in with birth certificates. So for most of the elderly, their age was a matter of debate. They would say, well, I'm not sure I was born in 1903 or 1905, but yeah, I'm somewhere around there. So Pontians from my father's side. On my mother's side, and I only met my mother's mother, who in fact raised us and lived with us in a typical Greek fashion. They were from the west coast of Turkey, the Mikrasiates, from the broad area of Constantinople, Pandermas, Myrna, those towns. And my mother's father was also from that part of the world. They all obviously emigrated to Greece with the exchange of populations in 1923 when they were reasonably young. Now, my father, I mentioned that he was probably born in Asia Minor, but officially in Nausa. My mother legitimately was born in Thessaloniki in 1929, where the family had settled. And my mother and father met in 1947, were married shortly thereafter, and I was born shortly thereafter. So that's the very beginning.
Do you know what they did in Turkey, Papoudis?
Sure. On my father's side, they were, workers in oil fields, in construction, different places. Not necessarily, they did not have a real profession, if you wish. They were not teachers or doctors or lawyers. They were just middle class, poor, workers. On my mother's side, her family was more in business, but it's unclear what business they were in because my grandmother's brothers lived in Istanbul and were trading goods. My grandmother, was born and raised in Panderma, in Panormos, where she was until she came to Greece. My mother's father was an officer in the Greek army. And there's a long line of military people in our family. I was maybe the first one who just bolted out of the military line. So he fought during the Mikrasiatik catastrophe. He was a young officer. Then, of course, they moved to Greece. He was a high-ranking officer in the Greek army in Albania, fighting the Italians. And then once the war ended, he returned to Messolongi, where he was the local commander of the Greek regiment there. And in 1943, as the Italians began sensing the end of the war for them, they actually had rounded up a lot of senior Greek officers. That's well documented. It's in books and other places, and put them on a large boat to sail to Italy including, many military units of their own. And the assumption was the Greek officers will serve as a shield and protect the ship from allies attacking it. Turned out the English sunk the ship, before it reached Italy, and all the Greek officers aboard, died in friendly fire, if you wish, in that event. So my mother's older brother is a retired Army officer. He's still alive. My own younger brother is a retired Army officer. My first cousin, the son of my mother's father, is a retired officer of the Greek army. And they all reached very high ranks, like generals and that sort of thing. And my mother's sister, she married somebody from a military family. So there's a lot of military around our family. I was never attracted to that and never did anything. In fact, I didn't even serve in the Greek army as a conscript. So
Now, Stelios, you were born right after the war, 2 years after the war.
Correct. 1948, yes.
Thessaloniki suffered a lot in many ways. What was it like, Stospiti, back then?
Yeah, it's interesting because if I were to begin describing our living standard, your hair will rise in your head or other parts of the body. We didn't have much of anything. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember one year we celebrated Easter. We had an outdoor laundry room, which was about the only place that was large enough to have all of us sit around the table, and no electricity. And we had a bottle in the middle where we stuck a candle, and we had Easter dinner. And you would think, oh my God, this is so awful. It didn't seem awful at all. And for a very simple reason, no one around us had any more. That was the standard of living. I'm sure there were rich people in Thessaloniki in the late 40s, early 50s, but cleverly they knew how to hide. They were in places we wouldn't know. They were in special neighborhoods or some legendary big, landmark-like homes. We knew of them, but we never saw them. I don't know where they were hanging out and what they were doing, but it didn't feel like much of anything. I remember the Marshall Plan. I remember being handed loud color American shirts. I was a little kid. And we used to all make fun of each other when we see each other with, I still remember it, an orange colored plaid shirt. And it was very loud colors, very un-Greek. And other kids did similar things. And the way we used to always refer to said, O Theos Truman must have those. So, Uncle Truman gave them to us. And it was like that. When I was in elementary school in 54, I started first grade, there used to be tins of American cheese and butter. And we're all instructed to bring a slice of bread from home. And around mid-morning, they'd give us, a wedge of American cheese and some butter to put on our bread. And we didn't have knives, so we used our fingers to spread the butter on the bread. And that was our mid-morning snack. So all that sounds pretty bad. It wasn't. It was just, like I said, life as one would expect, and one could find ways to enjoy with no toys. Nobody could buy. There may have been toy stores, but we made our own toys. I remember we used to go to the place where people would dump construction junk and collect wires from, cut little piece of wire from electrical installations, strip the plastic, and then using the wires, we would make little cars and other things. We'd take the rim of a bicycle and turn it into something to play with. We make our own little scooters, with, wheels from, made out of anything. It was just, like I said, nobody minded. It was just fine.
Stelios,
That was the way to be.
Was there a lot of stories about the war that your mom and dad passed on?
Constantly.
The difficulties, and it was a brother. Do you have other siblings too?
I have a natural full brother who is 3 years younger than me. So I'm 72 now.
Yeah.
He's 69. He's the retired Army officer. My own father died when I was 16, and my mother remarried subsequently. I had, a half brother from that, but unfortunately, he had very unexpectedly passed away in March of this year at the age of 51 from a heart attack. So I only have one brother, no other siblings.
And they passed down a lot of stories to you all?
Constantly. I still remember, because we lived in a very small house,
Yeah.
there was a kitchen, which was basically the place to be. This is where we cooked. This is where we ate. This is where we did our homework. This is where we sat around chit-chatting, not so much us, but the grown-ups. And there was one other room, which was my parents' bedroom, and yet another room next to the kitchen, with two beds. My brother and my grandmother slept on one bed together, and I slept on the other. And when we'd go to bed at night, reasonably early, as kids should, the grown-ups would be sitting in the kitchen, talking, and I could just not go to sleep. I was just mesmerized by the stories. And the stories about the war were interesting in the sense that they essentially always focused on famine and torture, not on bravery. There were no great guerrilla fighters in our family or any stories anybody could have. It was always survival, how tough it was to survive the war, who died and why they died and how they do this and how they do this, and what was the brutality of the Germans as compared to, and in contrast to, the Italians, about whom there was never a bad story. I mean, it's almost as if the poor Italians, against their better judgment, got dragged into this war. And those soldiers, all they wanted to do was go out with the local girls and have fun and sing, but did not have 1 ounce of negativity or nastiness in them.
Yeah.
So yes, there were a lot of stories about the war, and the other types of stories, if I could add, were about the old country, Ipatrida. They were really embittered and sad. They left their own homeland. They never thought of that as Turkey, of course. They thought as broader, bigger, greater Greece. It was the place where they were born, their towns, their neighborhoods. And there were a lot of talks about Ipatrida. And in fact, pretty much all the all the real grown-ups, the grandparents, if you will, not my mother or my father, spoke Turkish, or Russian, depending on what interactions they had. So whenever they wanted to speak, so we wouldn't understand, they talked to each other in Turkish or Russian. Thessaloniki, our language, in contrast to Athens, has many more Turkish words and expressions than they do down south because of so many refugees, that came to Thessaloniki as opposed to Athens.
So I'm going to share my screen with you here.
Okay.
And we're looking at some spices from Thessaloniki. Tell me about that era of your childhood, because I know your dad was in that business.
Yes. So my grandfather and my father and my uncle, at some point, I'm not sure what they did before, but at some point when I was very young, they settled on having a little spice store. And the first spice store they had that I remember was in one of those, arcades that are, very, prevalent in the Middle East and Greece, and any kind of a warm climate country has arcades with stores because there's shade and there's some coolness, and they're all cleverly built so there would be 2 openings and there'd be a draft of some kind if there could be one. So I remember that particular place. I remember there was a coffee shop across the way within the arcade. There was a candy making little enterprise, a couple of stores down, and the colors of that candy, the little peppermint canes and everything else was just incredibly loud and vibrant. Then the business grew a little more, and then we moved into the honest to goodness Ladavika in Thessaloniki and had a bigger store. And the store basically, we were middlemen. The spices came from Asia and Africa, as they do for essentially, every country. The importers were typically Jewish merchants with long history of import-export and relationships throughout the world.
Wow.
Then we would buy from the Jewish merchants, a certain amount, let's say black pepper. So we'd buy a barrel of black pepper. The barrel of black pepper was 100 kilos. And then we would take, and every so often we fill, a tin with 10 kilos of black pepper, which was the peppercorns. It was not ground. And then it was my job when I was a kid to put this 10 kilos on my shoulder and walk 2-3 blocks to a place where there was a mill, and we get it ground. I can tell you, you don't want to be in a tiny, unventilated mill grinding pepper because you're going to be sneezing to death. It's a given. So it's like a passage to manhood. And then I would take it back, and mostly we sold the ground pepper, not the peppercorns, and we sell it in two different ways. We either would sort of like pack it in bags, 1 kilo at a time, and sell it to a grocery store throughout northern Greece. We had a whole client base in most of the towns in northern Greece. And then the Tobacalico, the grocery store, would
Right.
dispense that in small amounts on a weight basis to households. For even smaller amounts, for people with really difficult cash flow situation, they could go buy like a unit dose kind of thing. So we, not just we, but the whole industry, the whole market was, we would take a piece of, let's say, 11 by 14 cardboard, and on it attach maybe 50 cellophane envelopes. It's the same way people would buy cocaine, I guess nowadays. We would sell the pepper, maybe 5 grams of pepper or a small amount. We'd just stick it on those cardboards, and then the grocery store would have that, and someone would go and just peel one off and give it to her. Sometimes you'd find this even in Periptera, in these little kiosks that sell papers, if there's a big one. And so that was the essence of the business, the spices to repackaged, and sold to grocery stores, as well as we had a whole number of other items that, like detergents and chewing gum and, fly traps, things that grocery stores would sell. We had our own brand of ground flour and different things make for baby food and, corn flour and other things, My brother had posed for a picture to be on the box. Kid with curly hair. So
it must have been a great way to bond with your dad, and also, I mean, probably where you first got your business, savvy, and responsibility, right?
Yeah. Unbeknownst to me, all that is true. At the time, obviously, nobody thought about it. It was almost considered a given that a kid should help in the parents' work, whatever it is.
Right.
And if you go to this day, you often go to some taverna in some island, whatever. All of a sudden, there's an 8-year-old kid cleaning tables. You can bet, he or she is the son of the owner. I mean, that's how it goes. There's a place in Chalkidiki where we go in Furka, and the guy running the place now is in his 40s, and he's the grandson of the original owner. Well, we've known him since we've been going there 30 plus years because we have a home nearby. We've known him since he was a little teenager, cleaning tables. And that's just how it is because they train like this, and then the business gets handed over to them. So I remember when I turned 9 years old, it was determined that in the summers, I would just have to begin my professional career just to help the father. So I would take the bus from Harilao, the OAST, the regular, city bus, which was 1 drachma was the fare, whatever, it was some minimal amount. So I would take the bus in the morning and go downtown to La Vadica, which was about a 20, 30-minute bus ride, including all the stops, of course. Then from the stop was Venizelos and Agnatia. That's where I would get off. Then I would walk, 10 minutes or 15 minutes to the heart of La Vadica, to the store. And, the first year I did odd jobs, go deliver this to the, freight company and go to the next store and get this and do that. And then the next summer, they actually gave me a salary. They gave me 20 drachmas a week so I can cover my bus fare. And the third summer, they gave me more money because I was now doing more and more and more. I became the one going to the bank, depositing checks and taking money out and putting money in and other things. As it evolved, by the time, so 2 other things happened. My father had a small truck that he would load up with goods and travel throughout northern Greece to deliver the goods to the client base. And he had a set schedule of towns he would go to. 2 of them in particular.
Yeah.
Every Monday, he would go to Kilkis, which is only 50 kilometers from Thessaloniki. So it was he would leave at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and be back by 11 or 12. And on occasion, he, after lunch, he would come home for lunch and say, okay, you want to go to Kilkis with me? I said, sure. So we, would go, and, half the time we'll get a flat tire on the road. And in those days, the tires had an inner tube. So we have to, jack up the car, take the tire out, take the inner tube out, grind it out, clean it, put some glue and some patch, put it back in, inflate it again with a hand pump, and off we'd go. And this happened because the car was old and, nobody was invested. There were no really good tires in those days. So one little nail on the road and boom, you were done. So we would go to these things. But the real turning point when I was 15, the business wasn't doing very well. So we decided, my father and my uncle decided that my uncle should also go out to cover more towns with another truck of another friend who was selling other goods. So like to double up on that. So there was a question now of who would be minding the store in the evenings. And I would simply go to school in the morning and, I'd be done with school around 1 o'clock or 2, whatever. I'd run home for lunch and then I'd just go to La Vadica in, around 5 o'clock, open the store, and until 8 or 9, I'd be managing the store on my own. And I would study there. It was not as if people were lining up to buy goods. I mean, you wouldn't see a whole lot of people. There was ample free time to study and do your homework. And that's what I did. And I kind of I liked the human interaction. And in retrospect, again, there was a fair amount of judgment you had to exercise in transacting. We did not have set prices on our goods, for instance. There was maybe a nominal price, how much a kilo of ground cinnamon, would cost. But we would give discounts of that nominal price on occasion, depending on the client. So if the client was a volume buyer, if they were very good credit, virtually everybody we sold to, we sold the goods on credit and we collected a week later, a month later, 6 months later, sometimes never. So there was a serious cash flow problem that all businesses had. So if somebody was particularly good at paying up front, which was a rare occasion, or paying within a week or whatever, well, they got a better price. So I had to figure out, the whole client base and remember what price everybody should get, for a particular item and, what amount of discount they deserve and manage them there. And I suppose I had pretty good public relations. I think most of these people enjoyed seeing a young kid with a book open on the desk,
Yeah.
studying and then doing the business. I thought it was, a good thing. To me, it felt like nothing. It was just, what you do. I mean, there's no big
Well,
deal.
Stelios, you have to size up people, right? So you're
right.
doing due diligence basically,
Exactly.
and sort of real time satisfaction once you sell too. And these are skills that you used I'm sure as a venture capitalist and as a later in life.
The same. And I actually, if there's one thing I probably possess above average, if you wish, is I think I can see through people pretty quickly, faster than most of my colleagues in the business. I think in part, obviously maybe this may have had something to do with it. I think the other thing is that, in Greece, when you grow up, all of us Greeks sort of like learn that what appears to be is not. There's, some other fact, some other story. There's a subtext, there's something else, but things are not what they appear. If anything, they're not what they appear to be, they're something else.
Yeah.
So this notion that you got to see through people's situations, relationships, is, I think, ingrained to a Greek. Now, sometimes to a ridiculous extent. That's why conspiracy theories abound in countries like Greece, although one could argue there are a few conspiracies in the US as well. But to a healthy extent, that's a good thing.
Yeah. A lot of agape in the house. That's what it sounds
Absolutely.
like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of agape. And then ta gramata. I know that, your parents, well, they were educated, life's education, right? With the hard times brings sometimes a PhD in life is better than a PhD from Harvard. They stressed ta gramata with you, right?
They did. It was interesting because my father, I'm not even sure he went to high school because, you're in the war. That's not the sort of, because if he was born 1923, he was 7 years old when the war started,
Smyrna, right?
and
Yeah.
there was just not a whole lot of time. If you were a boy, they send you to work from your teenage years, and if you're a girl, they try to marry you off
Yeah.
as quickly as they could, so it becomes somebody else's financial responsibility. And I think this happened to both of my parents. My father started working since he was 12 or 13. So, and my mother was married off when
Was
she
that
was 19.
was it proxeneur?
No, but well,
Kind of.
not exactly. But what it was is, in those days, uh, there was a thing called Volta. So the young people would go and just stroll, on Sunday evenings, and we were, my mother's family house was at the edge of the city. It was a nice place for Volta. And clearly Volta was the matchmaking place. I mean,
Right.
young people would look at each other, and purely on facial connection, they decide whom they liked, and they just looked at each other. And sometimes they will have a signal to go meet quietly in some corner and chit-chat a little bit quickly. So I think that's where my father saw my mother.
Yeah.
And then he sent somebody to represent him. And I remember the stories being told that there were apparently 2 or 3 suitors, for my mother. My mother was quite cute when she was young. And the family had a meeting. My grandmother was sort of the matriarch of the family. And she collected, because my grandfather died in the war, she collected a couple of uncles and other relatives, and they sort of evaluated the prospects. And, they opted for my father because they thought, well, he's a Pontian, these are hardworking people, he'll be able to provide for her. And that was basically it. And I don't know if my mother had much say in the matter. I think she probably liked my father. But in those days, you learned to fall in love with your husband in due course.
That's
And
right.
each word is carefully chosen. You learned to fall in love. It was not, oh, love at first sight, and you date, for 4 years, then you live together for another 8, and then you have a couple of kids, then maybe you get married after that, which is how it happens today. So, so neither of them. Now, my mother, highly unusual for her generation, she went to high school and finished high school with good grades, and in a different environment, in a different society, one where, women's rights were more and better respected, and where financial stability were to be present in the family. She would have gone to the university. She was smart enough. Uh, and she wanted to study badly. And she always held this as a frustration in her life. And I think in me and through me, she saw her educational aspirations be realized. Now, in my case, again, it was nothing extraordinary, honestly. I remember a couple of things. I remember I must have been 4 or 5 years old. And on Sundays, I would go to my grandfather's house, which was a 20-minute walk from our house. Obviously, we walked everywhere. I mean, there's just, nobody had a private car, and even when my father got the truck, it was, a true, luxury. So we walked there in the morning, and the preeminent newspaper in Thessaloniki, as you would remember, was Macedonia. And I still remember the typeface of the letters that said Macedonia. So for some reason, I don't know what it was, I would take the matches, the burned matches from the ashtray that still had some charcoal in them, and I would try to imitate those letters, on the newspaper, just to draw letters like this. So then I went to first grade, no big deal. And then my mother's brother, my uncle, gave me a book, and I can still visualize the cover of the book. The book was called Heroiki Elada. It was basically a story of mythology.
Yes.
Hercules and Zeus and Kronos and all sorts of things. And I was just fascinated by that book. I read it cover to cover many times. I mean, I just loved it. So, and that was that vivid memory that I would have about sort of like a love for learning. Then I went through elementary school in a very normal, nonchalant way. I was clearly one of the best students in the school, no doubt. And the teacher would say this to my parents, and then there was a parent-teacher day. But I didn't feel special at all. Like, I'm like, again, it was okay. You got to do homework. I didn't think it was a burden doing homework. I enjoyed doing it, and I did it well. So, I never thought much about anything. And then I went to high school, and it was determined, and this is now an important turning point. It was determined that because I was a good student, I should go to the fifth high school, Pemdo Arenon, in Thessaloniki. Now, in those days, in the late 50s, early 60s, that school, through a peculiar twist of history, became a magnet high school.
Yes.
And the way it worked is that a number of good teachers had, assembled there, and it became known throughout the city. And then the school did something unusual and illegal, I suppose, which is, whereas every high school had a regional jurisdiction. So if you lived in this neighborhood, you went to Proto Arenon, the other neighborhood, Defter Arenon, whatever. Pemdo Arenon, the fifth high school, would actually allow kids from all over Thessaloniki and all over Macedonia to register if they were very good students. And we had to do entrance exams, to get into high school from elementary school. So there was a preponderance of, good student kids in that school and good teachers that fed upon each other.
Yeah.
And, anytime, someone of my generation, would be referring to high schools or whatever, they always call it to Thriliko Pemdo, the legendary fifth high school, because, so many great leaders, came out of that school. And I guess the two most prominent graduates, one is Dionysis Savopoulos, the musician, singer, who was 4 years older than me. I didn't know him at the time. And Yannis Ioannidis, very famous basketball player, who also became Minister of Athletics and all sorts of things. And him I remember because I was 4 years behind him, and I used to play basketball. Would play basketball in the yard of the school, and sometimes if they were missing one, they say, "Hey, you little one, get in." Well, the little ones were waiting to get a spot, so I probably passed the ball to him once or twice. I don't know. It's my claim to fame in basketball. But and once I went to high school, I all of a sudden now saw a larger population of talented kids, and that excited me and stimulated me. Not so much a competitive spirit to beat them, but to be better. And my first real inspiration was in first grade of high school, which would be my seventh year of school. High school, as you remember well,
Liceo, yes.
just 6 years.
Right.
And then it became high school, gymnasio, liceo.
Yeah.
But when I started, it was 6 years of elementary school, 6 years of high school. So my first year of high school, we had a teacher for Greek, for, philologia, for Greek literature, who was truly inspiring. And somehow through him, I became exposed to all the contemporary Greek writers writing in Demotiki. And Demotiki was almost a forbidden language in schools in those days because we were taught Katharevousa. All the teachers knew Katharevousa, nothing else. Now we could speak Demotiki, the vernacular, if you wish, in everyday life, but not in a structured way. And I just became an insatiable reader, during that point. Later on, by the time we got to third, fourth grade of high school, Demotiki became now officially introduced. It turned out I was the only person in the school, including the teachers, who actually had studied the grammar of Demotiki. There was a famous book. And the teachers would actually ask me to resolve issues and answer difficult questions. And as my classmates remind me, I used to write this really incredible, essays. The ekthesi was, one of the lessons, just write essays on whatever subject. And I was particularly good at it. And each one of them remembers a different one. It keeps sometimes reciting pieces of it. The teachers themselves were quite sort of like impressed and inspired by what I was writing. So my first inclination was I wanted to become a writer. That's what I wanted to do. And then so like some sensibility came into me about professions and making money. And there's a long story, and we can cover them in other questions as to what happened later. But the love for letters was first, I think in my mind, appreciated with that teacher in first grade of high school when he exposed me to Greek literature. And then I just realized how much I like to learn and become good at it. And then later on, I became as fascinated by mathematics, physics, and in some ways I did very well in high school because I was the complete package. I was good in every subject. It was a natural thing.
Having a mother in psycholinguistics and sharing with you, I think you learned a lot of logiki, a lot of logical skills, that you use later on in life. Let me ask you this, Stelio. I remember from my mother, who's a little older than you, but she always...
Don't remind me.
Not much. She had me at 17.
Anytime they talk about this high-risk group for COVID-19, I think they're talking about somebody else, but they're actually including me in those groups.
So she recalled her stories of growing up in Thessaloniki and the role like the American movies played. They would go. They would sneak in. And then I know you went to Frontisterio, right, to learn languages. Was that around the same time and when you got sort of the little bug for Ameriki or the New World?
No, it was separate things. Look, Frontisterio for foreign languages, was a must in middle-class Thessaloniki in those days.
I see.
Because the realization was that unless you learn a foreign language, you're dead on arrival. I mean, you need to know a foreign language. Now, originally, the foreign language, the preferred foreign language was French. By the time I was of age, it became English. And when I was 12, there was a Frontisterio a block away from our house. I signed up, and oddly enough, my mother signed up as well. So the two of us were classmates in English class.
That's great.
She was 30, and I was 12, because we only have 18 and a half years difference. Nobody thought a whole lot about it. They, hold on a second, this printer is printing a fax or something. Give me a second.
Sure.
So back again. So we went to class together, and we learned English together, and then she stopped after a couple of years. Actually, my mother does, speak English, which is the detriment to the family aspiration for the kids to learn Greek, because my whole family English, and all of them are still there. Brothers, cousins, nephews, nieces, they all speak English, every single one of them. Because again, as I said, that's just a must, including my mother. So there was really no motivation for my kids. They speak a little Greek, but not enough. The only time they spoke Greek is with an Albanian family working for us in Chalkidiki, and the two Albanian little boys did not speak English. They just spoke Albanian and a little Greek. So my kids spoke Greek with them, and that was, about the only time. So that's how I started learning English, and it was something you do, that kind of thing you learn. American movies was a separate thing. It was not where I would hear the language and learn from it. And some people have learned English from the movies. Not in my case. I would just read the subtitles. I was simply fascinated by the country, the vastness, the difference. Life in Greece in those days was a great distance from life in America. Now, the distance is minute, if any, in terms of simple, like appliances in the house. I remember in the 50s, we didn't have a refrigerator. Homes in Greece had what they called fanari. Fanari was a little shelf with a screen. It was a screen shelf you hung in the kitchen, and you put the leftover, half a loaf of bread, some leftover, string beans in tomato sauce, whatever. Hardly anything that, needed refrigeration. We didn't have a lot of extra food anyway. And you kept a little bit of cheese in there before it would go bad. So in the 50s, in mid-50s, my father came home one day, and he brought some wood and some tin, and he basically built by hand. I'm not sure if he had a kid or something. I don't know how he did it. He built an ice box. And that was our first foray into refrigeration. And then there was an ice vendor, a couple of blocks away, and every day they put in a cart with a mule pulling the cart, columns of ice, and they stop in every home. And we used to get a quarter of a column, and you put it in on the top, and that kept the place cool, and you kept food in there. That was in the mid 50s. America was chock full of appliances. You had everything in every home. So we ultimately bought an electric refrigerator, maybe in 60 or something else, and
Yeah.
no electric stoves, none of that stuff, until after I left for the US. I mean, it was a pretty primitive existence in that regard. But the vastness of America, the complexity, the differences in behavior, people, and obviously the universities, the factories. And I remember the USA Information Service, USAIS, which was probably a cover for the CIA or spies of sorts. They had an office in Thessaloniki, and they would show movies. And the movies were typically sort of like the promotional movies of the great manufacturing wonders, of the US, this huge distillery and this other, building a dam or highways and all this stuff. And we'd go there, a bunch of us, mostly younger kids, mesmerized by the sheer size and complexity of that society. That's what fascinated about America.
And you had family there, right? Some.
No, not in America.
Oh,
Zero.
okay. In
Not
Canada?
a single person. In fact, not a single person. I came alone. Not a single person followed me. My whole family is in Greece.
Wow. Yeah. So tell me how you transitioned then from the stereo or not from the stereo to you had to write exams, I presume, and I believe you wound up in Athens, correct?
Right. So that's the different kinds of frodisterio. Frodisterio is a catch-all word
Yeah.
for a type of school you go to, after your normal school to learn additional skills. So one is foreign languages. The other is for a lot of kids, if they couldn't quite cut it in school, they go for the to get extra help for their daily homework.
Like
And
tutoring. Yeah.
Yeah, tutoring, exactly.
Yeah.
There's yet another type of frodisterio, which was preparatory school, the same way they've got, Kaplan preparatory school for
Right.
SATs or whatever. In those days, in order to enter the university, and I presume to this day, yes, to this day, they
You're
take
right.
entrance exams. And the entrance exams every couple of years change in format, but typically they address a number of subjects, and you go there, the whole country at the same time, just like SAT dates, you're given the exam and you got to answer. And most of them, hardly ever multiple choice tests. They are either mathematics or physics problems or essays. So they need to be graded, by a whole litany of teachers that get deployed for this. In the old days, when I was a kid, school, no matter how good it was, didn't prepare you well enough for those entrance exams because they covered much more material and in greater depth than what you would learn in school.
Yeah.
So certainly those of us who are in the big cities, Athens and Thessaloniki, would go to those schools. And, I went for 2.5 years to one of those, where pretty much the elite of the students from all of Thessaloniki who are aspiring to enter Polytechnio will go there. So we met up all the other kids from the other schools, and we just get drilled day in and day out on problem solving in math and physics and chemistry and that sort of thing. So by the time, we got deeper into this whole process of preparation, somebody would put up an algebra problem on the board and would say, oh yeah, that's number, 123 in the Jesuit algebra handbook, and we were very, very good at that sort of thing. To give you a sense of how crazy this whole thing was, I skipped a day of school when I was in 11th or 12th grade with a couple of classmates. And we basically sat in somebody's apartment, whereas the typical kid would skip school to go to the movies during the day or go to the beach. We skipped school and we took an English algebra textbook with problems, and I'd be translating, and the others would be writing with carbon paper so I can make multiple copies and distribute to our classmates so we can practice, more algebra problems. That's what sort of nerds we were.
Yeah.
So total nerds. So the time came to apply to the university, and you had to fill out a priority list of what school, assuming you made the cut because of your grades.
Yeah.
In the entrance exams, what would be your number one choice, your number two, your number three. So in the last 2 or 3 years of high school, I became truly enamored by physics. I wanted to become a theoretical physicist. So I put down as number one, physics Thessaloniki, number two, mathematics Thessaloniki or whatever. So my high school principal, he had to sign that form. He actually took it and tore it up. He says, I'm not going to sign this. He says, I'm not going to allow you to do this. He says, you're crazy. He says, you of all the kids here, you're a sure thing to get into the Polytechnic Institute in Athens in electrical engineering, which was the preferred department. And I still remember the words. He said, look, you'll do that, you'll get out, you get a job with the power company, and you'll wear a white shirt and a tie, and you'll be sitting in an office and signing papers, and you'll be making 5,000 drachmas a month salary. At a time when the average worker was making 1,500 drachmas a month, salary. And he says, and if you really truly love physics, he says, fine. He says, go finish, then go do postgraduate work in physics, and you can do that. And ultimately, we compromised. I put number one, the electrical engineering department in Athens. I said, well, but if I don't get in, I don't want to become a civil engineer.
Yeah.
I put number two, physics at Thessaloniki. But I got in. And look, it was so competitive. Give you an idea, in the whole country, they would take 100 kids into electrical engineering at the Polytechnic Institute in Athens. The last one who could get in, his grades would be good enough to be number one in virtually every other school in the country, except for civil engineering, he'd be number 10, something. So all the smart kids wanted to go there. And in fact, there's a long legacy of people who've been very successful who came out of there. Many of them are in the US, and they're good professional academic careers. And to this day, even though professionally the country changed and being in the engineering sciences, which was highly sought after in the 60s, 70s, up to the 80s, my friends who, for some reason, either didn't make the cut, because it's one exam, and you could have a bad day, or decide otherwise, those who got into medicine had much better professional careers, financially speaking, than those who got into engineering, because medicine became a far more lucrative profession in subsequent years than engineering was. So I just got into the engineering department in Athens. It was my brother, my mother, and my grandmother. We packed up our belongings, the few things we had, and we went to Athens. We found an apartment. We rented an apartment, found a high school.
Wow.
My younger brother. And I didn't like it. I didn't like Athens because I didn't know Athens.
Yeah.
I had a girlfriend in Thessaloniki. I left her behind.
Now,
I really didn't like engineering.
Your dad already passed away?
Yeah, he had passed away.
And that must have been terrible for the family.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
With no money really to speak of, or on meager means, and I didn't like the engineering affect of Metsovio. It was. I remember the first thing they did to us is they made us go buy a pair of overalls, and they gave us a bronze cube with 3 centimeters on the side, and said, "Here, take the tools and turn this into 2.5 centimeter cube." And I would just be grinding away just to be careful to not mess it up. And I wanted to be a theoretical physicist. I didn't want to mess with, engineering work of that kind. And lucky for me, I got a letter, literally as I started the university, suggesting if I wanted to apply for a scholarship in the U.S. to some organization, which I did. And I was awarded a scholarship, and then I left in December.
Yeah.
Come to the U.S.
Stelios, tell me about this gentleman.
Richard Feynman. This is the picture. This was my inspiration when I was in high school. when I was going to the USA Information Service and perusing different things, I became aware of him. And in fact, I wrote to Caltech
Yeah.
and had them send me a brochure of the school. And this picture with Richard Feynman playing the bongo drums was on the cover of it, or prominently displayed inside. And I thought he was such a fascinating person. And then when I was still in high school in Greece, and I still have it, I bought the first volume of the Feynman Lectures in Physics, which for any physicist, it's like the Bible. It's the most insightful, illuminating way of discussing complex subject matter in a way that makes tremendous sense. And I just, believe it or not, I had this aspiration that I wanted to come to the US. That's when I really became convinced I wanted to come here. I want to come to the US, study physics, and get a Nobel Prize in physics. So that.
And I think you were referring to the Anglo-American Hellenic Bureau, right? And that was a program, sort of like a Marshall Plan sort of program, correct?
It's an interesting thing, and not enough is known about it. But it
Yeah,
turns out
fascinating.
my son at one point did a project on this, and so I helped him do some research. The Anglo-American Hellenic Bureau of Education was started during the war by a number of Philhellenes at Columbia University. There were Americans, English, and some Greeks. And the first activities were to really raise money to buy ambulances for the Greek public health service, to help with, poverty brought about by the war, to send equipment to Greece. And they were pretty active. Now, once the war ended, in the late 40s, they switched gears and they said, well, maybe what we ought to do now is help educate the promising youth of Greece and send them back to Greece to help in the reconstruction. Greece was in a reconstruction mode. Whether, in fact, there was any governmental involvement in this on the part of the US government, because at the time there was, a subtle, battle between Britain and the US in terms of turning Greece into their proprietary sphere of influence. I'm not sure, but General Van Fleet was the chairman of that organization for a while, and there may have been some other connections. It's unclear to me. By the time it got to me, there was this old man named Chris Lucas, who was a sociology professor, retired from some upstate college, and he was essentially running a one-man show. I mean, he was writing his own letters, he did everything. And what he did is he had created a network of affiliations with a number of small colleges, some of them community colleges, other liberal arts colleges, and some major universities. And he would bring a bunch of us, a few every year, on a so-called 3-2 program. So you attend the liberal arts college for 3 years, kind of like be groomed in good base of education. Then for another 2 years, go to an engineering college. And in 5 rather than 4 years, you end up now with 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Science from the small college, and a Bachelor in Engineering, a BSE from the engineering college. And that's the umbrella under which a whole lot of us were brought in. We call ourselves the Lucas kids. And those of us, plus or minus 3 or 4 years of arrival, and I imagine other groups do the same, or maybe, we all are actually in very good connection with each other. We get together, certainly for Easter every year, we get together in my house to roast the lamb, and some of them are not grandparents. And it was really the only family we had in coming to the US. Some married each other, some baptized each other children. So we have this sort of like extended family that has grown over the years. So I was brought in to go to a small college in West Virginia, Bethany College, for the first 3 years, then go to Columbia in engineering.
Does that look familiar?
Yep, that's Old Main at Bethany College in the winter. And it was exactly like this when I got there. And I've never seen that much snow in my life. And it lasted and lasted and lasted until May. So
culture shock, right? I mean, I understand you boarded a train to Paris, to save money. You come to New York with $200.
Yep.
And I'm sure when you see New York, you must have flipped, right?
Yeah, New York was extraordinary. I remember I was greeted, as I've told that story many times. Uh, yes, you're right. I did take the train to Paris. I left December 31 from Thessaloniki. Now, the choice of date was because January 1st, I'd be in a different status vis-a-vis the army, and I would have to pay a security deposit to leave the country, which was money we didn't have. So I left on the 31st of December. 2 days on the train during New Year's Eve to Paris, where with some distant relatives, and I took a plane from there because it was a cheaper flight than flying from Athens to New York. And as you pointed out, I did have $200 and 2 suitcases with clothes and books, and that was it. And I was so nervous about the food on the plane, whether it would cost money or not, that I refused to eat, fearing that maybe like an extreme amount, like $100, I'm going to lose half of my stash, in one meal on the plane. So I was pretty hungry when I got to New York. And then through the Anglo-American Hellenic organization, some family was earmarked to greet me at the airport and take me to their home for a couple of days before I went to West Virginia. And I remember in those days, of course, you could enter the airport, you could be anywhere. There was no TSA. So as I was getting off the plane, there was a bulletin board, and I saw my name on a note pinned on it, and I picked it up, and it said, I will wait for you in the lobby next to the Pan Am counter, signed Claire, the lady who was to host me. So I remember turning, there was a flight attendant with this, light blue Pan Am uniforms with a little hat, and I said, excuse me, what is lobby and what is counter? These are two words I did not know. So she explained to me, and sure enough, as soon as I cleared passport control, the lady was there and said, clever for her, a little name tag on her raincoat, and they took me to their home. And I remember I was fascinated. They had this thick wall-to-wall carpeting in their home, and everybody walked around barefoot. And it was just highly unusual, almost inappropriate. I mean, we had cement floors or dirt floors or wood floors, and certainly nobody walked around barefoot because we thought we'd get our feet dirty and dirty up the sheets, but they didn't care. Of course, they showered every day and all that, so better hygiene habits. And then the third day I was there, they basically drove me to the railroad, the Long Island Railroad, bought me a ticket, gave me a couple of tokens for the subway, sent me to Penn Station. From there, I got instructions from them how to ride the number 1 train and get off at 116th Street on Broadway, across from Columbia, where the office of the organization was. When I got out of the subway in New York City, and I came way early because I was fearing I'd be late, so I had an hour or two to kill. And I started walking on Broadway up by Columbia. It was like a dream. The buildings, the people, the noise, the intent. It was just fascinating. Then a few days later, I got on a plane to Pittsburgh, and then a friend of mine, still a friend who lives in Athens now, Vasilis Mastorakis, who was the best man, another Lucas kid, was the best man. I was the best man in his wedding, so he was the godfather of my daughter. He is still alive. So we drove in a car from Pittsburgh to Bethany. And at some point we started going through towns in West Virginia around the steel mills. The smog was so bad, you couldn't see. You had to go down to 20 miles an hour because you just couldn't see. And the ground was just black with soot that would settle down. It was really unusual. It was a shock.
Yeah.
It was a real shock for me. But, soon enough, it took me a while, but I acclimated myself.
So what was life like at Bethany? I know you left I know that you were the highest, still hold the record for the
It's 1968.
As a bison, you're still the record holder. And note that the most assists came from Cosmas Muratidis a few years later.
Yeah, Cosmas, I know, is a good guy, very good player, excellent player.
What was it like there at Bethany?
Well, Bethany was
a great period, right? In the 60s, and just
this was my first semester I was basically trying to figure out what the hell I was doing and where I was,
Yeah.
listen to American English at rapid pace and understand what they were saying, do well in classes and start becoming less noticeable. To give you an idea,
Were you homesick a little bit at first?
no, not at all. This is
Wow.
fascinating
Yeah.
because I remember one day, I can still visualize it. It was snowing all the time.
Yeah.
Okay? So I went to the cafeteria and I got myself a hot dog and French fries and a Coke, which is kind of like a luxury in Greece, you know that stuff. So I
Sure.
went to my room, turned off the lights, and was sitting by the window watching the snowflakes come down and eating my dinner. And I said, my God, I've been here 2 weeks and I haven't felt homesick. The density and intensity of new experiences and stimuli was so much that I didn't even have time to think and miss my mother or my home, my girlfriend. It was just, I was immersed in this new experience. But I was also in many ways, I was scholastically fine because I had a very good background.
Yeah.
High school, even the first semester I did very well in school. But culturally, I was completely unprepared. My first day of classes, I put on a suit because I thought you were a suit. And then I look around, everybody's got loafers with no socks, jeans, and shirts with the tails hanging out. So the other guy, Basil, my friend said to me, "Look, this is not the way to dress here." And they started making fun of me, predictably. So he took me to the general store. It was a tiny town. The whole town was the college and a few other people, the faculty and some helpers. So we bought a pair of jeans and a pair of high-top sneakers, So I started trying to look like
Fit
the
in.
rest of them.
Yeah.
Try to fit in. So that was the first semester was a time of acclimation. Then the summer, my first summer I spent in New York working as a waiter in a Howard Johnson's restaurant. And then you get hardened. It was very tough because I had difficulty understanding the English spoken by the customers from all parts of the country with local accents. The food was totally unlike anything we would eat in Greece, like an open hot turkey sandwich. Where would I have seen a piece of Wonder Bread, a slice of turkey, some gravy on top, and some mashed potato on the side? I didn't even know what it was. So I would go to the kitchen.
Does that look familiar?
Well, that was my very first job. Totally, chock full of nuts on 47th and 48th, I think between 40th and 49th and Avenue of the Americas. Oddly enough, by the way, chock full of nuts, a number of those franchises were owned by a Greek American family. I forget their name now.
Really?
Callas or
I didn't know
very
that.
well known.
Wow.
And so there were all of us Greeks who were working in the restaurant.
Yeah.
Chock full of nuts was a great place in those days, and I experienced it as a customer as well. Great coffee. To this day, they retail coffee in tins and boxes in grocery stores.
Yes.
And donuts. And, for under $1, you could get a coffee and a donut and get change. And it was a no tipping rule. It was signed there. So to make sure that even if people left behind proper change for a tip, we couldn't take it. So we were in those gray herringbone pants where the pockets were sewn in. So we couldn't put anything anywhere. And blue, kind of like scrubs kind of shirts.
Yeah. I still remember the song, Stelios, chock full of nuts is that heavenly coffee.
That's right. So the older guys in the store, which is the younger guys, the trick, they said, look, it says, if they leave you a quarter as a tip, shit out of luck. Can't do anything. But if it's a dime or a nickel,
It'll fit.
a dime, you can put in the cuff of your pants and nobody would know. So if they left us sometimes, if it was like 80 cents, they left $1 behind, there were 2 dimes, we try to sneak them into the cuffs and unload the cuffs downstairs when we change to leave work. But I worked there for spring break of that first year. I came to New York. I hitched a ride with somebody else, who was driving to New
So it
York.
was good to get back to culture, basically, from
It
West
wasn't so
Virginia.
much culture as it was
And make
other
some
Greek.
money. Yeah.
Yeah, and make some money.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's, I started getting used to what it's like. And then for the summer, I worked at a Howard Johnson's on 51st and 6th Avenue, diagonally across from Radio City. The total irony of it all is the building where choke full of nuts was, in those days, actually, from 42nd Street to 52nd Street, all of 6th Avenue was low-level buildings. The only big building was what is now the UBS building, which was the Payne Webber building before, and before was the Equitable building. That was the only tall building. Everything else was, one of these low buildings.
Right.
So Choke was one of those. Many, many years later, I was vice chairman of Common and Company in that same building in a skyscraper. So I used to tell people, I said, after 40 years, I moved up 13 floors. That's about it.
That's very funny.
But anyway,
you did really well at Bethany, right? And then I think you became class president. Is that right?
More than that. I went back after the first summer, and now I was sort of like I was a jaded, hard-ass New Yorker. My accent got different. My attitude, my behavior, a sudden can-do attitude.
Hair a little long or what?
Not quite. That came later. And already in the spring of my first year, I had told Basil, my friends, look, I said, why don't they play soccer? He says, well, it's America. We don't play soccer. I said, that's nuts. So when I came to New York for spring break, we bought a ball and went back to Bethany. And I went on Main Street and started juggling the ball for everybody. It's like a spectacle. And then we put up a big poster and we announced, the beginning of a soccer club, whoever wants to come and play. And sure enough, a bunch of kids showed up of varying levels of aptitude in soccer. I was particularly good. I was a very good, if I'd stayed in Greece and I joined a professional club, I could have had, in those days, perhaps, I don't want to overdo it, a career in soccer.
And so I think I know who your team is. I'm looking right behind you there.
Yeah. Aris Thessaloniki, that's right. Because I was born right, 2 blocks away from the field. So we started playing, and then one of the kids knew a local amateur club of immigrants in nearby Steubenville, Ohio. And they invited them to play with us. And we put up notices to the school, here's this new thing. We were playing soccer. And for some peculiar reason, I think it was the oddity of it all, the newness, a whole lot of people showed up. Half the school must have been there, all sitting on the side of a hill. So we played those guys. And, I was, skillful, young, fast. So we beat them 4-1, and I scored all 4 goals. In different ways. I scored one directly from a corner kick by curving the ball, bending like Beckham. I scored one by taking the ball at midfield, dribbling everybody and the goalie and going in. So this guy said to me, oh my God, can you come and play for us? I said, okay, sure, why not? So they became a lifelong relationship with these wonderful Italian, Greek, German immigrants working in steel mills and the coal mines. And it was a wonderful experience. To feel, I was like their beloved young nephew or whatever. And they all showed up at my graduation. It was wonderful.
So you really didn't feel like a foreigner or any discrimination?
Well, all of them were foreigners. All these people in the soccer team were immigrants. Yeah. The school had extremely few foreign students.
Yeah.
I was foreign. So the way I dealt with the foreign issue, there was a lot of discrimination and racism that was just systemic. It was not anybody was aiming for that. It was just the way they felt about it. When I came back to school in the fall, I already had established myself as not just, as I said, a New Yorker, but as an athlete, a soccer star.
Yes.
So, and then I did well in school. So by my second semester in college, I was now part of the mainstream.
Yeah.
And I was feeling a lot more comfortable. And then on my third year, now well on my way in being the captain of the team, the founder of the team, the top scorer, the world was beginning to change. In 1968, it was Columbia University, Watts, all these major issues, anti-war demonstrations.
Kent State.
I had something of a history of an activist from Greece. In fact, in my last year of high school, I was perennially the president of the class in high school because the kids always felt I'd probably have an easier way telling the teachers we don't want an exam today or whatever, because the teachers, most of them liked me or respected me. Not all, but many did. So in 1966, when I was in my last year of high school, it was a time of governments in Greece called the apostates. These were people that had broken off from political parties, were being appointed by the palace to form temporary governments. There was a time of turmoil in Greece, extreme turmoil. And one of these apostates government forced the teachers into, to go back to school by order when they wanted to have a strike. And we students, in our infinite wisdom, decided to go on a pan-Thessalonikian strike, because we knew each other from Fondation, all the student leaders. We organized a strike of all the high schools. So we would meet in Salamina, which was at that point, the fish area where the boats would come. It was a big open field. There would be like Agora on different days with carts of watermelons and other things. So we'd meet there and then march through the city. That lasted about a week. And once this thing was over, the teachers had to be back in school. We went back. The principal of the school expelled me for a week because he felt, and I didn't realize that at the time, he said, look, he says, you ruined my career, because they all assume we put you guys up to this. And he was a leftist, so he was dead on the water. And not only they expelled me for a week, but I was the Simeophoros, the valedictorian, the flag bearer of the school, which was a huge honor, particularly if you were from Fifth High School. I mean, it was like, it was it. And they took away from me the right to carry the flag in the next parade. And that is what cost me. I still remember bitterly that experience, but I already had a fair amount of experience in student activism and politics. So as this thing started happening in the US, and even little old Bethany in the middle of nowhere, and with the legacy of that being a religious college, was becoming sensitized to these issues. And with a long series of events, I became a candidate to become student body president. And I became student body president really on the wave of the anti-war movement. And at the time, by then I had very long hair. I was part of the hippies of the school, which were a minority, but the rest of the kids were becoming, as I said, sensitized to these issues.
Yeah.
And what gave me the ability to be voted on as president is that, yes, I did have the long hair, but I was also one of the best students in the school,
right,
and a well-respected athlete. I mean, like I said, in 1968, I have that record of 6 goals in a game that has not been broken. And it's unlikely it will be broken because teams are a lot more balanced now. It was, in those days, it was the first year we played, the team scored 21 goals and I scored 18 of them. Nobody else could score, so that was, it's an unfair circumstance, but that's how it became that I would have that record.
And you actually impacted the curriculum, right?
I think because, I was not a stupid revolutionary. I didn't want to burn anything down.
Right.
However, I did appreciate the administration didn't know who I was and were very nervous that I would burn the house down.
Right.
And so what I did is I immediately, went to the dean. I said, look, it's a new world. Every faculty committee of the college should have a student representative. That's it. I said, okay, fine. So then I appointed myself to the curriculum committee. And then again, with subtle suggestions that would burn the place down, I convinced them to completely revamp the curriculum. It was a very, old-fashioned curriculum. You got to take, a whole lot of course requirements and this and that. And there wasn't enough space and time left to explore new ideas. Because by the time you did the course requirements, they were general to everybody. And then your major, you're just about done. You didn't have a lot of other room to explore other opportunities, other ideas, other areas of knowledge. So I think that was, I think, the biggest legacy I left to that college. And I don't think anybody appreciates this. And I'm not calling this lack of gratitude or anything, is that because it was a very subtle thing. By becoming president of the school, by not burning the place down, and by generally being a sensible guy, I completely redefined the stereotypes. The stereotype was that if you're a hippie, you're a drug addict. If you're a crew cut, buffed up kid, you're an athlete. And if you're a nerd, you're a good student. And I combined all three in one, and that confused people. And it actually, I think, made them be more open-minded. And the evidence I have for this, which in part suggests what I'm saying is correct, is if you look at the yearbooks of the college, up until my year of being president, then my year, then every subsequent year, the phenotype of the college changed. Pretty much everybody started sporting longer hair. And again, I can't say that I was the reason for that. Society was changing. But I certainly had something to do with making somebody believe that you could have long hair and not be completely worthless, as an individual. And that was a big point in those days. If you were, stereotyped, for sure. For sure.
Stelios, at this time, so is the family still in Athens at this time?
No. They left immediately. We moved back to Thessaloniki in December.
Yeah.
We unrented our apartment in Athens, back to the family home. And I packed my belongings, said goodbye to my girlfriend, and I was on the train. And then they stayed back to our family home.
So you graduate, you decide now you're not. I know you kind of felt guilty, right, a little bit about leaving.
Well, I still was. Once I realized that the Anglo-American Hellenic wanted me to be an engineer, I bolted out of officially the program and said, no, I want to study physics. And there was no big debate. No debates. The guy didn't care. I mean, he saw I was a decent person, a good student. So I applied to graduate school, and I was accepted a number of places, but probably the best and nearby was Carnegie Mellon University.
A great school. Yeah.
So I went there in the fall of 1970 to start a PhD in physics. And the guilt you're referring to is that at the time, and you have to be old enough or a student of history to remember this, the term military-industrial complex was very much, a term in vogue. And in fact, a lot of research programs in physics and engineering in many universities were funded by the Army, Navy, Air Force, Department of Defense. And for a number of us who were anti-war activists, and I marched, it was make love, not war, flower children, all that stuff. We none of us felt the war was either justified or appropriate or morally acceptable. Many of us felt guilty in being in physics and become essentially indirectly an instrument of the military-industrial complex that was promoting an inappropriate, immoral war. So I started struggling with what to do with myself. And, a couple of the two forces that came to a conclusion and a compromise was my desire to do right and get out of that pro-war environment, and my inability to shed anything I own, which was a legacy of post-World War II Greece, where you just don't throw stuff out. We recycled everything. So I felt I had amassed, a long period of knowledge in physics and mathematics, by virtue of even from high school. I was an excellent physics student, and all that was going on. So the compromise was I would study biophysics. So I would apply what I learned in physics to the solution of biological problems, which would be good for humanity, but also not waste all of my prior knowledge. And once I concluded that, I then made yet another conclusion that that in order to do this right, I would be best in a university with an attached medical school.
Yeah.
So I can have greater exposure to biomedicine type of faculty and applications. And Carnegie Mellon did not have a medical school. So even though I started a little research in X-ray diffraction, there, then NYU in New York City was starting a pilot program in biophysics. I applied, I was accepted, and in 71, I moved to New York, Washington Square. I stayed there 3 years, got a master's degree in physics, did all of my preliminary work for the PhD, passed the qualifying exams, and then I physically moved to the medical school of NYU on 30th to 34th Street on First Avenue in the cell biology department. And then I did my actual thesis work in structural biology. And then I stayed on in the faculty of the cell biology department for a number of years.
When you were in both at Bethany, because I know there's a little church in Weirton. I've been to that church. Did you involve any Greek American friends?
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
When I first got there, word got out.
We're in Pittsburgh too, and in Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh is, I'll give you a different example because in some ways Pittsburgh is only 40 miles away, but it's like a world away. But in the Britain, Steubenville area, there were actually a fair amount of Greek families in different professions. Once word got out, there's a Greek boy from Greece here. I got lots of invitations for Sunday lunches in families that invariably would have a 15-year-old daughter, sitting around making cookies or something or serving tea, So I figured it out pretty quickly what was going on. It didn't last very long. I'm not a religious person, certainly not a church goer or participant in church activities. So honestly, I don't even know where the Greek church is in Weirton, but I'm sure there is because there were phenomenal Greeks. There was one Greek family, George Antonio and his family, who became close friends because he was playing soccer in that Steubenville team. And that's how I met him. And I met a couple of others over the years, but I never really I was more involved with the Italians of the Steubenville team than any of the Greeks around. And in Pittsburgh, I'm sure there's a Greek church. I never went to it, but I went to the Greek coffee shop. So I lived in Oakland and near University of Pittsburgh, which was a short walk to Carnegie Mellon University. And I was on Forbes Avenue. The parallel is Fifth Avenue. And on Fifth Avenue and Forbes in between, there was a Greek cafenio. So all the Greeks would get together there. And there was also like a house of pancakes or something. We'd all go and have coffee there. So I would go see them and they would play cards, tavli, whatever, and I would chit chat with them. And then there was a Greek team called Apollo in Pittsburgh. So I played for them for a while when I was there.
Yeah. So New York, you go back to New York, you love it, and you're doing well at NYU, right?
Yeah.
Studies. And you're working a million jobs, right?
Well, my go-to job was restaurants, like any good Greek.
Yeah.
I started off my career day one that I went to Bethany, washing dishes in the dining room for breakfast. So that was my first job. It's a job. Then I worked the counter at Chock-full of Nuts, and then I was a waiter at Howard Johnson's. And over the years, I worked in a number of Howard Johnson's around Midtown as a waiter, bartender, soda fountain man, cook, assistant manager. I did every job you manage all throughout graduate school. Look, the beauty of the restaurant business, certainly those days, is that once you figured out how to do it and you have a certain comfort about you, which you learn, and if you have a reasonable personality, it's that much easier. The beauty is that if I had a free evening, I would show up at the restaurant and say, guys, who wants to take off tonight? There was always somebody ready to take off because most of the waiters were aspiring actors and actresses and other artsy people, and they just needed to work barely to make ends meet until the next audition, hoping for the big part.
Right.
So you would work the evening, get a free meal, pocket $20 in cash and tips, and off you go.
And survive.
Yeah. And so it was, and most of the time we had fun doing it.
And how are you enjoying classes at NYU? I mean, did it fit? And then with the medical school too, next door, not next door, uptown, I guess.
Yeah, very different. I mean, the classes in physics were smaller, highly structured, mostly problem solving. We just ground it out. When I went up to the medical school, I took a couple of years before I started real research taking a whole lot of biology classes. And those essentially were, classes in the first and second year of the medical school curriculum.
Yes.
And those were typically given in a lecture hall of 150 to 200 students, with multiple choice exams, very different. And it was brand new discipline for me. I had no biology background whatsoever from before. So I would have, thank God I spoke Greek so I could understand most of the terminology by virtue of their Greek roots. But it took a lot of work to keep up. And I realized that the medical students that were in the same classes as I was, they all had a lot of classes from high school on through college before they got to medical school. Some were even exempted from medical school classes because they had so much I had no biology in high school, no biology in college, nothing. So it was, a dive in the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, and you became
But I did fine.
That's where your teaching career starts there, right? Because it sounds like you're an academician at heart.
Yeah, my teaching career began at Bethany College. The second semester I was there. My first teaching assignment was to be the assistant teacher in a class on New Testament Greek.
Wow.
So one class was being taught on New Testament from the original, the Greek text. And I was particularly good in ancient Greek in high school, and it was fresh. So, I was a very valuable assistant teacher in that class because I had, obviously the teacher understood all the religious aspect, and, he knew the language quite well, the language of the New Testament, but didn't necessarily have the longitudinal appreciation of how the language evolved from the Hellenistic Greek, to modern Greek, and sometimes I would give interesting insights in the discussion. So that's when I got started. I quickly became a teaching assistant in physics and mathematics. I started having a little business in college, writing papers for the football players in physics and mathematics, and that basically got me two things. It got me money and it got me protection. So rapidly, I would like not to be touched by anybody because all these big brutes, relied on me to get through college. And I would get like $5 for a paper, or $10 for a paper, depending, So, you have to make ends meet. You have to be inventive. So subsequently, when I was in physics at NYU, I had for many years a job teaching physics and mathematics at New York Institute of Technology, the campus by Columbus Circle. And then, once I moved to the medical school, the expectation was I would take the cell biology histology course the first year I was there. I'd still be paid as a teaching assistant.
Yes.
Then I would be a teaching assistant, after that, which I did. And in fact, after I got my PhD and stayed on, these courses in the medical school are major productions. They involve many faculty, a lot of materials. So I became the course director in my last 3 or 4 years there of the cell biology program.
And I think when you were teaching biophysics, you had a favorite student, correct?
In medical school, as fate would have it, I was in fact only a teaching assistant at the time. I was on my second or third year as a teaching assistant, but I was already, to brag about for a moment, sufficiently good, both in teaching style as well as the subject matter, that I was the only one who was a graduate student but was given responsibility for a lab section, all by myself, with a faculty member as my assistant, who didn't know enough about cell biology. And as luck would have it, there was this truly stunning looking first-year medical student who was assigned to my section and had nothing to do with that. And she was very bright and she was very pretty, and she acted like she had a lot of questions because she already taken the class in college and knew all the answers, but she pretended she needed help. And to make a long story short, we actually started going out pretty quickly. In those days, this would have been anathema nowadays, but within the first month of the course, we started going out. And within 6 months of having met each other, we were married. And it was one of those sweet stories of the medical school. There's, those people who were in school around the time we were there, I a grad student, she a medical student. There's that famous basophil story that they tell, and it's legend rather than reality. What I used to do is to drum up excitement in the class. One particularly difficult section is recognizing the morphology of the different blood cell types as they evolve and develop. And there's one blood type in circulation called a basophil. It's got very prominent blue granules. If you see it, you know it. Wow, what a different thing. But it's extremely rare to find. So, every year what I would do is I would, spell out a little competition. Say, look, whoever finds, a basophil, the first one to find a basophil, I'll give you a box of Greek pastries or a book. Or that particular year, I suggested that I would take them out to dinner, whoever found one. And what do you know? She found the first basophil. So everybody assumed that I spiked a slide box with a basophil-rich slide so I can take her out to dinner, except the fact is we already were going out for 2 weeks before that, so I didn't need the extra help. But the famous basophil story is people who were in the early 80s at NYU Medical School, they all know it.
Stelios, so career-wise at this point, was there a mentor basically that inspired you? Because career-wise, at that point, you were probably headed towards an academician
Correct.
Sort of career.
Yeah. So actually, the issue of mentorship is a very important one. When I was in graduate school, I did not. Part of the problem was I was a structural biologist in a conventional cell biology department. So other than my thesis advisor, there was no one else I could talk to about science. And you need stimulation with each other. Everybody else was doing more conventional cell molecular biology. So that was one problem. And then literally the week I got my PhD, the week of my thesis defense, is when I saw the initial public offering of Genentech stock in the stock market.
This is the 70s, right? 79?
October 1980.
80.
October 1980. And that gave me the idea to move out of laboratory science and go to the investment business and become sort of like a link between the science world and the investment world by, allegedly.
Just some light bulb went off? Some light bulb?
It was a light bulb. It was a little bit aided by my wife because the summer before,
yes,
she had spent the summer as a temp. So because we had no money, she worked in between first and second year of medical school. And the temp agency placed her at Merrill Lynch. And of all people, she was the temporary assistant to the drug analyst. And within a week or two of her being there, said to me, he says, look, he says, I think I know what you should do because I was struggling with what to do next. Should I stay in academia? Should I pursue something different? And I can assure you the issue of money and earnings was critical because I was extremely poor, as was my wife. She was also an immigrant. Yes. She was born in Cuba and her parents were true immigrants with, jobs that didn't make a whole lot of money. So I felt the obligation to be able to provide. And a career in science, certainly in those days before scientists could also be in part commercial animals, you couldn't make enough money to speak of. But it was unclear what you would make as a doctor. I mean, it was a great distance between then and big earnings. So I felt the need to pursue alternatives. And we were talking about it. She says to me, this is the job you got to do. She says, this guy's a PhD in chemistry and a law degree. And he basically talks about drugs and drug companies. Says, you know that stuff. You can learn what you don't know. You can do that. And that stayed in my mind as an idea. And then when I saw the IPO of Genentech, I said, now I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what he's doing, but not for big drug companies, for these nascent biotech companies. And then a couple of days later, another light bulb went out that basically said, okay, you know enough science, and what you don't know, you know how to read, you know the alphabet of science. And maybe you're clever enough as a business person and can, make a living here and there, but you don't have any formal training in business. You got to demonstrate that. What is a formal demonstration of business acumen? It's called an MBA. So I made a deal with the person who ultimately became my scientific mentor, was the chairman of the department, a famous cell biologist. And I said, look, I'll stay here and I'll help with the teaching because I was already becoming instrumental in the teaching of the department and maybe the management of the department. But I'm going to go to business school at night. And then this is a dead-end commitment because at some point I will have to leave to the next job. I'll give you advance notice. Well, he said, whatever, absolutely. And with him, I developed a far better appreciation of science. I really fell in love with cell biology. We spent a lot of time together reviewing papers, grant applications, and doing things. Then I went to business school at night. And as being part of the NYU staff, I could do it for free.
Right.
So there was another wonderful.
Did you love business school? Did you like it? You enjoyed it? Or it was okay?
It was okay. I'll tell you why. Because I was an evening student, and pretty much everybody else in the evening classes had a job by day. They would just fly in, fly out. You know.
Right.
In fact, I don't recall, a single person with an exception of anybody I met in business school that I remained friends, except for 2 or 3 people, all of whom were just like me, scientific retreads.
Yes.
And we met in a high-tech investing class, and we became very close friends. And we all pursued careers on Wall Street. And, to this day, we're in distant contact, but, we know each other's whereabouts. But we were the first wave of people with PhDs and academic backgrounds getting an MBA to go to Wall Street to become a biotech stock analyst. And that's what I did. And I finally got
Did the Genentech IPO sort of create a buzz in the lab? I'm wondering.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what caught my attention. And it's another one of those things you remember very well. I remember walking down the hall and going into the tissue culture lab. And the reason for the tissue culture lab is because it smells, like bacteria. So you always know it, and I can still smell bacteria if I want to recall the experience. And right in that lab, labs usually have a bulletin board where we put up things.
Right.
More often than not, you'll see some scientific data or some other things, some reference numbers that people have posted, or you'll see pictures of a dog or a newborn, or something else. This time around, there was a cut-up from the New York Times by the IPO of Genentech. And those who were a lot smarter than me, understood already this was a big thing. I didn't know what Genentech was, but I said, for scientists who typically consider everything else in life as unimportant as compared to their own scientific work, for them to be so excited about this, it's got to be big.
Yeah.
And I remember people in the lab talking about recombinant DNA. Again, this was molecular biology, far away from me. I was dealing with, viral structures and capsids and helical symmetries and that sort of stuff. And then I looked into it a little more deeply. And then I started looking around. And in the space of a few weeks, I said, this is it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get an MBA. So, in fact, this was October of 1980. Within a month or so, I had signed up for the GMATs. I took the GMATs in December.
I'm sure you aced them, right?
Well, it was easy.
It's all math.
I got 800 or whatever the score was. And then I started in January of 81. I started at NYU. And I finished in 3 years part-time at night by basically taking 3 classes per term, and I was done by 83 or 84.
And tell me about
looking for a job.
Tell me about your thesis, because that was important.
Yeah, my thesis, it was sort of like a little clever initiative on my part. I had a choice to fulfill the MBA requirements, either do a thesis or a project or a couple of different things. So I opted to do a thesis, and the thesis was to be, a manual of how to invest in biotech. And I assumed that if I did it right, I could maybe even sell that, because they were beginning to have a few things people were selling for like $300, a copy or whatever, in a limited distribution, or use it as an indication of my knowledge, to secure, a job. And sure enough, it worked. I did that. I wrote that volume, including also a director of all the biotech companies in existence at the time. And then I used it to fulfill my requirements and also to go around and demonstrate, look, I know what I'm talking about. Here's what it is. unbeknownst to me, I mean, I knew nothing about Wall Street at the time. In the late 83, 84, 85 timeframe, it was not the best time to look for a job on Wall Street. So whatever door I managed to open, closed shut pretty quickly until finally in the fall, of 1984, I landed on someone and somebody else, and I interviewed for 6 months, and finally in June of 1985, I was now a legitimate Wall Street biotech analyst at a firm called Donaldson, Lufkin and John Red.
DLJ, yeah.
DLJ was a legendary firm at the time.
No, and there were no bioanalysts at that time, right? I think
very few.
Were you the first?
No,
one of the first, yeah.
No, I was not the first. I'll tell you what it was. In the early 80s, there were a handful of people who had been reassigned from other positions to cover a biotech stock.
Right.
The first legitimate analysts, who were all of us, MDs or PhDs, usually with an MBA, we started coming to Wall Street in 84, 85, 86. So I was part of that wave.
Right.
People. And in fact, I've collected the launch reports of all of them, and I have them, on record. And once in a while, we talk to each other. And they all have taken, they all managed to have long careers on Wall Street, and they're in peripheral, semi-retired professions. I'm the only one who's still very active in the space. So in a way, a lot of people ascribe to me contributions to the field far beyond I've actually contributed, largely because I'm still around and very prominent. I'm still very active.
Yeah.
People that predated me or my contemporaries, like I said, they're in a more or less semi-retirement phase, if they're still alive.
Yeah. I know we're running a little short, so I know you go from you go from DLJ to Drexel, and you're doing very, very well, and then from there to Payne Weber, where you introduced several new instruments, Sparks, and
yeah,
sort of did a lot of rural D or private placements in bio, and then you go to SG Cowan as vice chair, investing in some of your own money. And I got to ask you this: one of the companies was Anadis, or is it Anadis? That's what I want.
There was a pronunciation.
Is that a joke, Stelios?
Disaster. It was, people called it Anadis, Anadis.
Anadis,
yeah. But actually, I named it Anadis.
Yeah.
And the reason I named it that is because the company was the result of merging of three companies.
I got you.
It was a company we started in Heidelberg in riboproteomics, a company in the Boston area that was involved in assay development, and a company in San Diego doing chemistry. And the thought was that we start doing the basic biology in Heidelberg, move to Boston for assay development, then move to San Diego for chemistry. And I thought it was going from east to west. Anatoly, Visi. So that's why I named it Anadis. And it was done in the middle of a long dinner in Heidelberg with a lot of wine, and everybody said, great idea, great name, let's do it. And we just didn't agree on a pronunciation.
Yeah, but I mean, and today you're chairman of the board of one of the Rolls Royce of biotech companies, Biogen. You're the co-founder of Exelixis and of Regulus Therapeutics, on several other boards. So, it must be unique just to have seen, this whole industry and field from its infancy to where it is today, and to have played such a big role. It must be fascinating from you.
It is truly fascinating. And if there's any uniqueness you can ascribe to me and my role, two things. One is, as I mentioned before, longevity. From the moment I decided to follow biotech, which was 1980, it's basically the origins of the industry. Until today, I've been active, and I'm probably sort of like the acknowledged historian of the space.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody wants an article or a lecture on the old days or whatever, and not many people care, they'll come to me. And I do possess a lot of financial data of historical nature, which I make available to Wall Street analysts for them to republish with attribution, because nobody has financial data from the 80s the way I've assembled it.
Yeah.
The other aspect of some uniqueness is that I'm one of the very few people that has been part of this industry in multiple roles.
Yes.
I started as a biotech analyst. I spent 20 years as an investment banker doing financial structuring, M&A, you name it. I co-founded with my own money and my own share of ideas a number of companies. I've been involved in growing those companies. And in the last 12 years, on the board of Biogen, I've been part of a very large enterprise, and I've been very involved in the broader issues of the biopharma sector. So this combination of, company founder, analyst, banker, advisor, corporate chief, very few people have had. And that gives you, the only reason why it's important is because it gives you a sense of the full picture, because these companies are really the amalgam of many disciplines. You got to understand startup company formation. You got to understand intellectual property. You got to understand science. You got to understand medicine. You got to understand finance. You got to understand operations, commercialization, public relations, the regulatory environment, challenges coming with the complexity of the reimbursement picture. So it's a very complicated industry, and it's very hard. Most people, in fact, even people who rise to top echelons in the business, almost by definition, come up through one of the pillars, through commercial or through R&D, and learn the rest on the way. And many of them are quite well versed as well as I am and more. But in my case, I've done it all, wearing different hats as a paying job, if you wish, rather than learning on the job.
And still a poet at heart.
And still a poet at heart, yeah.
And a philosopher, the universal man of biotech. That's
Yeah.
And you've helped and brought along many Greek Americans and Greeks too.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a story. I'm glad you brought it up, because there's a story behind this. It's the following. I remember I was, as any young person would be, quite sensitive when I was young. And there I am now, alone in the wilderness in the early 80s, newlywed, not having any money, trying to redefine careers, taking a major risk because I'm already gradually moving away from the scientific pathway to this new job that I don't have. So I remember one evening, I was trying to network and collect information.
Yes.
I called up a healthcare analyst at a firm called First Boston, which is the predecessor of Credit Suisse.
Yes.
And I remember his name, I will not mention it. And I called around 7 p.m. Around 7 p.m. and he answered the phone.
Yeah.
There was no voicemail in those days. There was nothing. And I said, look, I'm so-and-so. I'm a scientist at NYU Medical Center. I'm collecting information on the biotech industry. I wonder if we could speak for a while. And very abruptly he says to me, I'm sorry, I only have time for the clients of the firm. Hangs up the phone. And then I said, I was very hurt. And I said, if ever a scientist needs help in cracking Wall Street, or a Greek, I just know what that came to me. Yeah. I would be there for them. And I think it is, I've truly kept to my word in this regard. And I think what has happened, because I probably predated, there are a couple of guys I know who were in biotech before me, but they're not as active as I am. So I'm probably the longest serving, the oldest continuously active person amongst the Greeks in biotech. Most of the others, at one point or another, sometimes I helped, I mentored, I talked to them. Sometimes they just chat with me, and certainly many have helped me. So in this regard, yes, I'm central to the Greek presence in biotech.
Yeah.
And of course, we gather up everybody every year for a meeting in Greece to support the foundation. So pretty much everybody, as I run into people that are Greeks in biopharma that I don't know, I send them emails, I connect with them, and next year they get invited.
Which is a whole other discussion we're going to have at some point.
Sure.
About the wonderful foundation you created. You reminded me of a story about Socrates, who was asked, what's the meaning of life? And he was asked that, and he basically said, to be a noble Athenian, and the next question that obviously comes to mind, and what is a noble Athenian? Very simple, to leave Athens better than you found it. And I think
Yeah.
that's a guiding principle that we can all use, timiotita, philotimo, all these beautiful things that we learn, and to give back. Lightning round. Okay, I know your favorite sport is soccer. What's your favorite book or books?
Uh, I mean, that it's like,
I
if
know
you
it's
can see
tough one.
behind me, you see this ton of books there.
Dovlepo,
They're
yeah,
all favored and they're all about to be read on the next plane right now. I'm falling behind because I'm
yeah,
not on planes anymore.
yeah.
So I got a backlog of a lot of books.
Favorite movie?
Um, don't really have one. I'm not big on one kind of favorite thing of anything. Depending on my mood,
Yeah.
I'll watch and rewatch different things. So
All right. Or how about genre? Westerns, comedies, any?
a little bit of everything. I mean,
Yeah,
for different reasons. I think maybe this is sort of like a theme in me that I'm sort of like diverse. A good Western
yeah,
is the beauty in the study of good versus evil in a plain, linear, objective way,
yeah,
and no complicated characters. A comedy, a great comedy, is a lot of fun. Drama, intrigue, complexity, especially now with a lot of high-tech stuff.
yeah.
Science fiction, but only if it's plausible science fiction. I was never a Star Trek fan. I mean,
Right.
come on, give me a break. But The Martian is a movie where theoretically much of what was there could happen.
Yeah.
It's at
Even
the edge.
even The Matrix, which is
Yeah,
amazing, an
yeah.
amazing
So,
film.
so these things intrigue me.
Yeah.
Some of the medical crisis types of movies, if they're realistic enough. And I've always had this issue that you could create an exciting movie based on science without necessarily sacrificing scientific principles
Yeah.
and make it seem silly to the minute portion of us who get it scientifically. So,
Favorite Greek singer, Stelios?
that's easy. Kazantzidis
Yeah, right.
is the god.
Yeah. And favorite place to go to Greece, Chalkidiki, maybe?
Thessaloniki, hands down.
All
In
right.
the words of, and maybe we can end with this, in the words of Socrates that you
Yeah,
recalled, I want to be a noble Thessalonian and then secondarily a noble Greek.
there you go. Yeah. And
So
then lastly, one son I know of. How many children?
I've got 3 kids.
Three kids.
My oldest is my daughter, Christina.
Yeah.
She's a clinical psychologist practicing in Connecticut.
Bravo.
My next daughter is Alexandra, who is an executive for Uber Southern Europe, lives in Madrid.
Wow.
And my young boy, Jason, is a sales rep at Pfizer.
Who, thank God, doesn't have COVID. That's another story.
Correct.
Stelios, two quick questions. Where do you see the industry going? And lastly, what's your greatest accomplishment and what do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah,
Real softballs.
the way the industry is going is a very complicated discussion that maybe we schedule another call for that. It's hard
Okay.
to say, but the top line is the bio-based scientific disciplines we've developed will permeate ever more increasing numbers of daily life and activities and industries. So this is a true revolution. So far as what I want to be remembered for, I don't so much care about being remembered as leaving something of value. And the one thing I want to leave behind of value is an objective cataloging of what happened in this industry and really address the question of, easy enough to understand the human interest story. Why a father with a child with a disease starts a company to treat the child? Easy to understand. A question that's not been addressed adequately that I'm working on is all these people who have invested in this business, why did they invest? How did they come about deciding which investments to make, which not to make? Well, by and large, on average, under the last few years, people have not made money on average investing in biotech, but there were flares. There were just individual cases of extreme success. That's an important question, and cataloging the evolution of the industry, documenting it by showing the financial picture and the motives behind those with the money, because without the money, there wouldn't have been an industry. And that's another very long discussion. So maybe we can schedule, more times in the future and get right into the heart of the industry, and also talk about Greece, what can happen there, what our foundation is doing, what more things we aspire to prepare to do.
Thank you so much. This was beautiful, beautiful, and inspirational 2 hours. Thank you, Stelios.
Thank you, Art.
Have a wonderful day. Nasa ka lang.